So, guys, today we have an interview with Dave Crosland. If you've seen Under Construction 1 or 2, he's obviously featured in that. And, he's really known for getting as big as possible, a lot of drug abuse in order to get that size. And while most of the people that I feature on this channel are natural bodybuilders and powerlifters, I do think it's interesting to hear the other side of it, whether it's somebody like John Meadows, who is open about what he does but tries to be as healthy as possible, or somebody like Dave Crosland here, who really went about it in an unhealthy way for a period of time. I think it is interesting to talk to people like that and to hear maybe where they went wrong and why somebody who has even no interest in doing anything like that might benefit from hearing the message that they have. So, like I said, it's a little bit different. We're going to talk about some controversial topics. Hope you guys find it interesting. All right, everybody. So we have Dave Crosland with us today. He is well known for Under Construction and Under Construction 2, but he is also doing a lot of harm reduction services. So welcome, Dave.
Hello.
So can you give a little bit more of your background? I first came across you a few years ago and just, I saw like a trailer for Under Construction, kind of just talking about this journey that you've had getting really huge and everything involved with that. But as you mentioned right before we started, you do a lot with harm reduction as well. So can you kind of just talk about your background a little?
Well, background training wise, fat kid, played rugby, wasn't very fast, wasn't very strong. Brother had a set of weights in American terms, basement of the house, cellar for us English people. Played around with them and found I enjoyed it. I was a bit of an angry kid. No real reason for that. Had a normal upbringing. There was no issues. There was no family problems or anything for that reason. I just seemed to have a bit of a internal fire, and training gave me a very good outlet. It also, I don't know, I suppose really in the very early days, I enjoyed almost the masochistic side of it, the sort of self-punishment side of it. Then I also found it was something I was good at. It was something I could do quite well. Started off like most people, started messing around with weights, then joined a gym. Rugby soon dropped to the wayside, and I started focusing more on training. Didn't have a great deal of knowledge when it came to diet, didn't have any knowledge when it came to drug use. And for the first three and a half years of my training, I was a staunch natural. I didn't judge using, but I was very adamant that it wasn't for me. I was very lucky in that the gym I trained in had a large number of very high quality bodybuilders coming through. Ian Harrison had visited there. A lot of top British guys at the time, so Billy Payne trained there. Kev Taylor, who was a middleweight British champion. Mary Ann Gay, who was a women's heavyweight champion and also went pro. And these were my training partners. So at 16, I'm training with some of the best bodybuilders in the UK.
Awesome.
And as it happens, some of the best powerlifters in the UK. So I sort of got into a very hard training ethos very, very quickly. And I was very naive to drugs, and I didn't know that the pros that I idolized in the magazines were drug users. I just thought the only reason they were bigger than me was because they trained harder than me.
Right.
So my focus for the first 3-4 years of my training was harder, and outwork everybody else.
Right.
Diet was shit. And it was very much of, if it said chicken in the name, I could eat it. And that include, beef burgers were fine because they contain beef, and chicken burgers were fine because they contain chicken. And I also made the very big mistake that I viewed weight as muscle. So at 19, I was 23.5 stone, which in American is, we're talking about 330 pounds.
Wow.
At 19, but I was fat.
Yeah, sure.
I was natural. I was fat, but I was leg pressing over 1,000 pounds for reps. I was squatting 4 plates for reps. So I was weak on my shoulders. I was weak on my chest, but I was strong on my back and I was strong on my legs.
Yeah.
I dieted for a show. I stepped on stage at 14 stone 3, which would be 140, about 200 pounds
Okay.
in condition on stage as a junior. And then there was really nowhere to go from there. Now, I was prepped for that show by Kev Taylor, and he had offered me anabolics, and I'd refused him, and he'd respected my decision, and he'd never offered me again. And then I decided at this point that, you know what, I don't see why not anymore. You know, where do I go from here? So, and the main drive behind starting with anabolics was because it meant I could train more and I could train harder, more than anything else. Luckily or unluckily, I don't know which way you want to look at it, but because of the people I knew in the gym, because of the people I trained with, I was put in contact with good contacts very early on. And I started my first cycle. I'd come home from university. It was a summer break, so we had 8-10 weeks, whatever it was. And when I came home, I was 19 stone, so 265, 270 fat. And I went back to university 10 weeks later, 270 with abs.
Wow.
I just exploded. But I exploded because of that background of hard training.
Right.
And my first cycle was 4 years long.
Wow.
I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
All I knew was every 4 to 5 weeks, firing 5,000 IU at HCG. I ran 2 injectables, an oral on and off. I changed one drug every 6 to 8 weeks. And total dosage stayed somewhere around the 1.2 grams.
Yeah. And, you know, part of it is like what I'm interested with your story is that because a lot of people I've had on so far are natural bodybuilders and powerlifters. And so your story is very interesting to me because you did start natural, like you said, and you got far with it, right? Even you said by like 19, I mean, you got up to 330 pounds. You cut down and you're like, what, 6'2"?
6'1".
6'1", okay. And so, you know, a lean, like conditioned 200 pounds is fantastic as a natural, especially at that age. So you did put in that hard work, but then you did decide to make that jump that a lot of people don't make. And so while, you know, maybe some people are interested in like specific dosages and things like that, I'm mainly interested in just like this journey that like pushed you to do that. And it sounds like you're somebody who likes to push yourself, and you kind of saw this plateau that you wouldn't be able to surpass as a natural. And the only way for you to do that was to take that jump that a lot of people just wouldn't want to take.
I think the difference with me to potentially to quite a few people was competing was never the driving ambition. Competition was never what I got into it for. I got into it for the training, and that was what I wanted to do, and that was what I enjoyed. And I enjoyed that challenge in the gym. I enjoyed beating myself in the gym. And I very often would come away from the gym with that thought that I could do more. I can train harder. And I have trained to the point where I've passed out. I've trained to the point where I've puked up. I've trained to the point where I've literally had to be carried out because I can't stand anymore. I've done stupid sets with ridiculous weights and ridiculous reps because that was the mentality I had, was harder. And that was the influence of people like Ian Harrison and Billy Payne. Billy was one of Dorian's training partners. So it was their influence at a very impressionable age that set this. And I also think growing up in Yorkshire, there was a very strong culture of hard training. I mean, the gym I cut my teeth in, you weren't regarded as someone who could squat unless you were squatting 5 plates. You weren't regarded as someone who could bench unless you were over 3 plates with your bench press. Really, you needed to be benching 4 to be considered as someone who actually could bench.
Right.
If you were lower than 3, you didn't even talk about it because it was just considered that you couldn't bench.
Right.
And that was sort of the ethos of it all. And the drugs for me weren't very much, the driving factor behind that wasn't about getting bigger or getting stronger. It was about being able to train harder. that was the motivation for me. So I didn't get into these things because I felt that I wanted to be bigger. The consideration of competing was always an afterthought. And it was always something that I never really enjoyed.
Interesting.
It was the training that I enjoyed. Though I did very much want to turn pro.
Right.
I did very much want to be one of the guys in the magazines. I didn't know what that entailed. I didn't know what a competition diet was really. I mean, the diet I'd done for my first show was incredibly extreme.
Mhm.
And how I maintained the mass I did, considering the diet I ran, was surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember the last 2.5 weeks, and a lot of it's a blur, to be quite honest, but there's probably too many nandrolones. But I remember the last few weeks I was living off Castellan and cabbage and doing two training sessions a day and a cardio session a day.
Oh. And what is the heaviest you ever got up to and a show you ever got to? Maybe like some numbers that you did.
They were never together.
Okay.
So my heaviest was 415.
Wow.
My strongest, I've never been particularly strong in traditional lifts, but I've always had a very controlled training style. So I've never been an explosive lifter. I've never been a very fast rep. It's always been quite controlled. So generally my tempos are two down, 1.5 up.
Okay.
Always very controlled. But best Piana net press was 220 for 5. Best bench was 220 for 5. Kilos, obviously, not pounds.
Sure. Right.
Best squat was 300 for 7. I think I did a 340, but I don't remember it. Someone else has said I've done that, but I don't remember it.
Okay.
Bent over row was 260 for 4. But my deadlift was only 300 for 4. Where I sort of was ridiculously strong really was shoulders.
Okay.
And I know this doesn't count because it's machine work in strength sort of talk, but I do over 500-pound pull downs.
Yeah.
And it was ridiculous at the time because I needed 3 people to get me under the pads.
Yeah.
Get enough weight on the bar to get me down, and I've snapped pull down bars before now with the weight I've used.
So how does your body feel after so many years of just pushing those weights?
To be honest, the only problem I actually have, I've got a bit of a problem with an elbow which came from a car crash.
Okay.
Which was December last year, which is more or less sorted. I've got quite a lot of muscular tears, but nothing that causes me an ongoing problem.
Okay.
The only issue I have is particularly my right glute doesn't engage very well. But that came from an accident again, and I've never managed to get it fully rehabilitated. Well, I won't say I never managed to. I never really focused on doing it because it wasn't really impacting my strength.
Okay.
Now, at the end of UC1 going into UC2, I have major problems with my back, or what we thought was my back. It turns out it wasn't. It was to do with this glute. So because the glute wasn't firing, my right spinal erector overloads.
Okay.
Another issue that's happening from that accident is that my core doesn't fire very well, which throws even more load into my spinal erectors and also into my psoas. My psoas got so overdeveloped, it started to pinch my femoral nerve.
Oh, wow.
They thought it was nerve entrapment out of my spine. It wasn't. It was nerve entrapment by my psoas. And that will occasionally still bob up now and again. But I've had a lot of time off. I've downsized quite dramatically. And so with my training now, I am literally I've gone back to starting all over again.
Yeah.
I'm building up from the ground, getting these functional problems fixed once and for all. But that's a slow process, unfortunately, and it's one that gets regularly hindered by work because training is not the priority it used to be anymore.
Right.
But yeah, my drive for everything I did was always pushing me more than wanting to do anything else. I had a dream of going on stage till I was about 24. And then when I had my first major injury, which was a detachment of my left pec, I just fell away from that, and I never really committed to competing again. I had a couple of half-assed attempts at it, committed when I was in my 20s.
Right, right. So for people who haven't seen Under Construction 1 and 2, what was like the general idea behind it when you started, and how did the two differ?
The idea actually, to some degree, came from Rich Piana. How it all came about, I spent 12, 14 years away from training. I'd come back, started training, was considering trying strongman, but I wasn't really designed very well for that. I've got very, very short fingers and big palms, and my grip's not particularly good because of that. And I've never been good at pulling off the floor. My biomechanics just don't help. That's an excuse as well, but it just didn't help. And at this point, I'm carrying this glute issue and lower core issue that I haven't actually realized at this point what the problem is.
Right.
So I'm narrowly having problems pulling off the floor. Anyway, Alvin Small, who's a British pro, I don't know how well he's known over in the States. He's a big, big lad, is Alvin. He started saying to me, Dave, compete. And I'm like, Alvin, I don't know the first thing. It's that long since I've done anything. I don't know where to start with it all. And he says, look, I'll help you. So I started dieting. I'd got up to about 370 at this point.
Wow.
I started dieting, and I carried on, and then I got down to, I was sitting around 300, 304. Now on a 7-point caliper reading, I was sitting at 10.5%. Obviously, that's not a true body fat reading, but that was off the calipers. So it would have been higher than that, but it was still reasonable. And I was sponsored by SSN and their UK distributor. We'd gone down and done a show. We'd done the body power show. So I'd worked the stand all weekend. And he'd said to me, how did I feel about my next bulk? Doing it all live, doing a big vlog of it all. And I was like, yeah, fine. I said, but if I'm going to do it, I want to be completely honest. Now, at this point, I'd already started to get involved a little bit with harm reduction. Mm-hmm. So I was always doing some work with some of the needle exchanges in the UK, and I was already starting to research the effects of the drugs and trying to teach myself more and more. When I came back to usage, I decided I needed to learn what I was doing rather than the ignorance I had previously.
Yeah.
This was born over him seeing the cues for Rich Piana when Rich Piana was with Mutant at Body Power. So I said, yeah, that's not a problem. I'm up for that. He said, and at the time, SSN had a brand called Muscle Junkie. It was a subdivision. And the idea was that I potentially would become the face of Muscle Junkie. Or my vlog would become very intimately linked with Muscle Junkie in the same way Rich had done with Mutant. So he went back to SSN in South Africa, spoke to them guys about it, and they went, no chance. We are not linking or getting involved with anyone that's open about steroid use. So he came back to me and said, it's a bust, Dave. We can't do it. I said, well, no disrespect, but I now want to do it. Yeah. I said, I think it will be there's nothing out there. Rich talks about steroids. He talks about his drug use, but he isn't being totally honest. There's a polish to it. Without sounding wrong, but there was an Americanism to it. It was a little bit flash, a little bit showy, and not truly warts and all. There was some editing going on there. Right. Over the years, I got to know Rich, nice guy, a lot of demons, unfortunately, but a really nice guy. And so I'm like, I want to show both sides here. I want to show the shit. I want to show the bad injections. I want to show the problems as well as the good. So we shook hands. Respectfully, I resigned my sponsorship, and I did my first video on YouTube of Under Construction. And the name was originally picked because it was going to coincide with potentially a supplement called Muscle Freak.
Okay.
That never happened. I've never actually been keen on the name. I've always not liked it, but it was there. It was started, and it was like, it's there. Bollocks to it. I mean, what do you call the name of my project to get really, really big? It nothing put off it. And so I started the project, and it slowly grew, and there was a lot of criticism, and that's fair enough. I mean, always people are going to be opinionated on such matters. And I just plodded on, and towards the back end of the project, I was sitting at about 365. Felt pretty good, pretty strong. The edge had gone off things. I was just starting to find a few problems, and I knew I needed some downtime. And James Grealish from JG Films got in touch. Now, we'd done a little bit of work together for an online forum, and he'd said, I want to do a film of what you're doing. And I'm like, fine. Yeah, I've got no issue with that. And he said, so, I'd like to come up and film me. I went, great. He said, but can you lend me some money? Because I've got no money for fuel. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Now, James was self-taught. He was a car salesman prior to picking up a camera. And we filmed UC1 in 3 days.
Oh, wow.
Now, one of the big remits I had about all this was that it wasn't to be fluff. It was to be honest. And if someone painted me in a bad light, then so be it. But if it had an important message in there, it was to be in it. Now, obviously, 3 days of filming is not going to track 6 months of being on cycle and growing. So what we did was, we didn't stage things, but like the shopping mall scenes, you see, I deliberately went that day to see people's reactions to me walking around. So it was staged in that sense. But what you see is how people reacted when I moved around. So there was nothing more to it than that. But so we fitted things into those 3 days that we could. As a result, some of the training footage isn't the most hardcore because it was just what we could get in those 3 days.
Yeah.
I'd trained heavier and harder earlier on in the cycle when I peaked in my strength for that cycle. But, it was just what it was. And then James went away and basically sent himself mad editing it to the point where he nearly had a breakdown with editing that film.
Wow.
And we put it out there and we just didn't have a clue. There was part of me that was like, well, if we sell 2 copies, I'll be amazed. And then there was part of me that was like, this could be massive because there was nothing like it.
Yeah.
And in the end, it sort of did neither. It had a little flurry early on, which was good. And then it became very consistent and was very consistent for a number of years.
Yeah.
So we're done. We discussed the 2. Now, when I set out originally, I never set out to be £400. I set out to see how big I could get. How big could I push myself? I'd always had no problem in growing. So let's see how far I can take this, and let's push the limits of what you can do with drugs and what you can do with food. When people unfortunately generally struggle to grasp concepts unless they've got something they can visualize. So by saying I'm going to try and get as big as I can, 250, 260, because it all depends on where your benchmark is to what you perceive as big. So I needed to try and find a number, and I'd always remembered Greg Kovacs being £400.
Yeah.
And though that wasn't the motivation, I didn't want to be another Greg Kovacs. That wasn't the drive behind what I did. It was the easiest way to convey what I was trying to be. So I'm trying to be £400. I think Craig was 6'5", I was 6'1", but that was my aim, £400. Mm-hmm. And that put a number on it, that quantified it for people and made it easier for people to grasp the concept of what I was trying to do. Unfortunately, after we'd filmed 1 was when I started having issues with what we thought at the time was my back with this trapped nerve. Yeah. And that was a long, long time fixing. And I was also a little bit stupid because I thought it was good enough to get going on the second project. And I felt pressured to start the second project because lots of people were starting to ask now, when you're going to do the next film, when you're going to do the next film. So we committed to it, and I wasn't quite ready. And I ended up going on cycle, then dropping doses halfway down, because at the end of the day, when you're up at 4.5 and 5G, you don't just come off. You've got there is an element of taper required, and at the same time, you don't just go straight back up. Mm-hmm. So I dropped back down to 2.5 or 3, thinking, all right, give it a couple of weeks back, I'll be all right, I'll carry on going. And it just didn't happen. And the result was I was on for a very, very extended length of period of time. And yet off the first film, I'd vowed I wouldn't stay on that long. The first film I was on for 7 months. And I vowed I wouldn't stay on that long because I knew it was getting negative towards the end of that film. I could feel the changes in how I felt. I could feel my health starting to go downhill. But at this point, I'm so fixated in finishing the film, and I'm so fixated in actually achieving that goal, I start to lose my way. So in the second film, it's a lot darker. I think James handles it exceptionally well, the way he's edited the film together, because he shows me effectively disappearing down a rabbit hole. Mm. And my relationship with drugs, which prior to that had been very much a tool to use to achieve a goal, they start to become the primary focus. And my focus shifts away from training being my primary focus to drugs being my primary focus. And at the same time, you see my health start to deteriorate. And the culmination of that is me in hospital with severely impaired kidney function. Okay. Which will be with me for the rest of my days. I've fucked them. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And so the second film was this emotional more journey. It's still a training film, but we reduced the training content in it because we didn't want to put out another bodybuilding film where it was just acres and acres of training footage. We wanted more the emotional journey, the thought processes, the mental state that someone goes through when you're pursuing the extremes. And I'd say the second one is probably a lot darker film. It deals with the death of my mother in there, and you just see me decline, both physically and mentally throughout the film. You see me decline, and I've only ever watched the second film once. Wow. It's a very uncomfortable watch, because if that mistake's the wrong word, but that project was poorly managed, I think would be a better way of putting it. And I actually ended up doing stuff that on the initial start of the project I was trying to avoid doing, particularly when it came to drug use and the amount of time I was on cycle. And you see my health deteriorate, and to some degree you see my mental health deteriorate, and it's difficult, or it's uncomfortable to watch that happen in yourself, particularly in HD. So I don't find it a particularly positive film in that sense, but I find it a necessary film.
Yeah, I was going to say with that second film, I think it maybe is like more real, but shows all the issues that can come from it. And like you said, I mean, there's obviously something to the mentality when you go to these extremes, right? Like the average person is just not going to do anything close to what you did, and not even just in bodybuilding, just in other sports in general or in life. People who, the CEO who works 90 hours a week. I mean, most people just won't ever do that. So I'm glad that you kind of showcase that so people could see what happened. And then, you mentioned, unfortunately, the kidney issues that will stay with you for life. And I know now you are downsizing. So what was ultimately what caused you to downsize? Was it the health issues? Was it something else, like mentally, that you saw as a problem?
It was a combination of a lot of things. I mean, I remember the day I stood on the scales and it went to 415. Now, this had maybe not so much 415, but being massive had been a drive of mine for, at this point, probably 20 years. And I'd suffered so much, and the film doesn't convey the level of pain I went through. And the pain clinic I was under actually gave up and said, we can't give you any more pain drugs, and you're still in pain.
Talking about physical pain?
Yeah. I was drinking bottles of morphine.
Wow.
How I didn't become a morphine addict, I don't fucking know, but I don't like painkillers. I never have done. So I really did sort of try not to use them as little as I could, but I was on tramadol, I was on Oromorph, I was on Zoromorph, I was on naproxen, a whole list of codeines, and I don't mean codeine, I mean codeine, a whole list of heavy dose painkillers. I mean, tramadol in 100 milligram, loads and loads of tramadol. And it still didn't take the pain away.
Wow.
When it initially spasmed and happened and I was admitted to hospital, they'd IV'd morphine into me, and they had me on gas and air as well, and it just wasn't touching it. It wasn't taking the pain away. So the pain I went through in that second film was horrendous.
Now, just for other people, was this like, what kind of pain was this? Were like just your whole body aching? Like what was...
No, you've got the normal aches and pains from training, and obviously at that size they're magnified.
Yeah.
And then I've got what literally is a vice crushing my femoral nerve in my hip.
Yeah.
So I was in, if anyone's had sciatica, double it, send it down the front of your leg from your big toe all the way up. My knee was constantly in agony. My feet hurt, my shins hurt, my legs hurt, and it spasmed every time I moved. And I was crawling from machine to machine on my hands and knees in the gym because I couldn't walk. Now, the gym I trained in was 4 flights up, and I'd crawl up the stairs because I couldn't walk up them.
Wow.
And I remember I actually passed out in the gym from the pain. I stood up, there's such a pain spasm shot through me, and I just completely passed out. I've been in tears from the pain and still training. And the day I had built up this image that this 400-pound benchmark was literally, I was going to reach this, and the bodybuilding gates of heaven were going to open, and a beam was going to shine down on me, and I would be elevated to a higher consciousness, and the birds would sing, and the lions would lay down with the sheep, and world peace would occur. And it was ridiculous the level mentally I'd built up that this achievement was going to, and I got there, and it was the biggest anticlimax I'd ever experienced in my life.
Wow. Yeah.
And I remember looking at the scale and going, all this for that, because I felt so shit.
Yeah.
And I looked shit. At the end of the first film, I never was super lean, but I held 360 in reasonable condition and looked all right for it. But by that time, I looked like a sack of shit.
Yeah.
And it was just a huge anticlimax. And the motivations now, healthier because last mass. But I've no need for it. What do I need it for? Who am I trying to... I definitely ain't carrying it for me anymore. I got and beyond to where I wanted to go to and proved any issues I had in whether I could do it or not. So the only reason I'd be carrying mass now would be insecurity.
Right.
Because I'm insecure in myself, or because I'm paranoid about what other people think. And that isn't there. Also, my family supported me massively through those projects, and I don't feel that they should continue to support me in anything that's overly intrusive in our time. So training's now not a priority because I don't want it to become such a major portion of my life.
And how are you dealing with that mentally? I mean, it sounds like you said you're not really insecure about it. I would think somebody who made that such a goal in their mind might be dealing with a lot of body dysmorphia by dropping 100 pounds.
I've had my moments, there's no denying that. It's been a journey, it's been a learning curve. I've had my moments. I think one thing that helps is I am extremely busy, which helps distract me and gives me something else that's positive to focus on. Body power this year was interesting from my own mental health point of view, because it was probably the smallest I've been, the weakest I am currently, in the environment with the biggest and strongest guys I've seen for quite some time.
Yeah.
And yeah, there was a little bit of but nothing that bothered me for more than 5 minutes.
That's
And
good.
I was quite pleased with that.
Yeah.
You know, I think one of the big problems with this industry is that people invest so much time in the way they look that they forget to invest time in who they are. And I've seen that, and I've been part of that, and I hold more value to what I do now, even if the industry doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
to what I achieved then. I mean, in this community, you could be an absolute fucking arsehole. You could beat the shit out of your missus. You could neglect your kids. But if you're 330 pound with abs and a 25-inch arm, shredded and massive and strong, you're a hero.
Yep.
Yet, you know, I get much more satisfaction from supporting and helping people that are having problems with the usage or even just to achieve their goals. And that's far more rewarding because it's not self-indulgent.
Right.
Well, not
Yeah.
in
I
the
mean,
same. There is an element of self-indulgence because
sure.
it's not directly in the same way.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great way to look at it. Because I think all of us. How old are you now?
Oh God, hang on. 37, 38, somewhere on there.
So, everybody
30.
eventually has to go through that, right? Like they eventually have to drop down in size, and whether you do that in like your late 20s or late 30s or 40s, eventually it's going to happen, and you have to learn how to accept that. And even for me, I'm a bit younger, but I'm 20 pounds lighter than where I was at my best. I'm not quite as strong as I was. And, I'm very busy with life right now. But like you, I'm giving back in other ways. And even like with this podcast, like I said, there's the charity aspect. So all of it does kind of come back to looking more inside about who you are and not just, how you look, which unfortunately, I mean, of course, the whole industry is based on how you look, right? So
Yeah.
it makes sense that that's what people focus on. But I mean, I would say it's more common than not that you see some bad relationships, either like with food or body image or something like that, or even, drugs, like people who are like pushing things and they can't stop themselves. And there's really a lot of like unhealthy mindsets in this industry, unfortunately.
Yeah. By the way, how old did I say I was?
You said 37 to 38.
No, I'm 48. Sorry.
Okay, a little bit different.
Yeah, sorry, I'm 48. Brain's not working today. So, mental health in this industry is shit.
Yeah.
Let's not bullshit about it. It is shit. And that's the thing. I think problems are already huge in that aspect, but I think they're very much unrecognized,
Mm-hmm.
and they're almost celebrated as being dedicated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, yes, you're going to get that. A dedicated individual will always come across to those that don't understand as being self-obsessed or being a little bit not quite well in the head. But when you see it in people that aren't competitive, or you see it in people that aren't successful competitively, you have to question a little bit like, come on, guys, you've not got the trade-off here. There's one thing about being obsessive and dedicated and pushing yourself to the limits if there's a reward there. But when the fifth time in a row you've not qualified for the finals again,
Right.
but you have no social life, but you can't go out on your birthday for a treat meal because you're so paranoid about your macros, because you miss your daughter's recital because you were training, you've got to look at balance, and that is definitely not balanced. And most people I engage with that have previously been very into their training and have successfully managed to step away, they say they're so much happier now, and they didn't realize how unhappy they were when their focus was singular.
Yep.
And let's be honest, the amount of us that are ever going to achieve anything through our bodybuilding on a global scale or recognized scale within the industry is very, very minimal. That doesn't mean you can't achieve things personally, and they can still be as important to you.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to be wary of the cost and be wary that actually the price you're paying, you're willing to pay. And some people just don't see the cost until they get to a point where it's too late.
Right, right. So, what would be what would be your biggest tip, I would say, or piece of advice for either like the industry or people involved in the industry to kind of have a better life going forward if they're going to stay within it?
Balance. Try and achieve balance. And that's difficult. But I think one of the ways of doing that is to have someone you trust who isn't in the industry, who understands it, but who isn't active in it. When you see fitness couples, and there will always be exceptions, I'm not saying this happens with everyone, but they seem to a large extent, self-manifest themselves and self-feed and feed the problem because they're both into it. So they both support the issues that they are both experiencing, because if they didn't, then they would have to expose their own issues. Mm-hmm. One of my big grounding factors for all I've done has been my wife. Because she'll turn around and go, no, it ain't happening. No, I want to go out for a meal and you eat like a human being.
Right.
And it's those things that pull us back to reality a little bit. So you need someone who's strong in your life to pull you back. Self-analysis is really, really good if you can do it, but a lot of people can't do it. And it's the problem is as well, when you get the drug involvement in there, that completely changes perceptions of things again. Their mechanisms within the brain change our perception of risk, change our reward chemical processes, even change our moods. They affect serotonin, they affect dopamine, they affect stress factors like CRF, and they affect stress reducing factors like GABA, and they completely change how we perceive what we do. And it's difficult to be self-analytical sometimes. And sometimes you've just got to stop and question behavior. Why am I doing it? So it's like, it's your birthday and you're going to a family party. Your kids are there, your missus is there, and you feel really uncomfortable about going because you know they're going to want you to eat a piece of birthday cake. Mm-hmm. You're not prepping for a comp. Your training is quite religious and your diet is quite religious. So why do you have such a hang up about eating one piece of birthday cake? And if you see those triggers occurring, you've got to look at yourself and question, why am I being triggered by this?
Right.
Why is this an issue for me? And you'll justify, oh, well, it's because I'm dedicated, I'm sticking to plan. What's a slice of birthday cake going to do?
Right.
So you've got, and it's just social media, stuff like if you put a picture on social media and it doesn't get loads of likes or you don't get comments and responses off it, and that upsets you. Is that a normal response mechanism for someone who's balanced? I can understand negative comments affecting somebody because none of us like to be criticized, but the fact that you've had no comments, that affects you. Then what's the driving factor behind putting that up there? And why are you so insecure that other people's opinion, and quite frankly, people who you don't know, who you'll never meet, who you don't give a shit about, or why are their opinions causing you so much distress because they haven't expressed one?
Right.
The people's opinions should count to you. Your loved ones, is your wife, or your husband, or your boyfriend, or your girlfriend, brother, sister, mum, dad. Now, they may not always understand what you're doing, and I understand that can sometimes be, an issue. But they're the people that care about you, so they're the people whose opinions should matter to you.
Sure. Briefly, I just wanted to hear a little bit about your experience. You talked about getting to know Rich Piana. I think at one point there was like a little controversy between you and Rich Piana, if I'm not mistaken. But I kind of just wanted to briefly hear about your thoughts on him. Obviously, he was a very controversial figure in the industry. A lot of people really loved him. A lot of people thought he was the worst thing that happened to the industry. What kind of opinion did you have there?
Rich, me and Rich used to talk a little bit via email. I wouldn't say we were close because we weren't in any shape or form. And we didn't particularly get into anything personal. What I found quite surprising was he was very much, yeah, come and see us at the show, come down to the stand, we'll have a chat. And then it was very, very apparent when I turned up, he was incredibly uncomfortable. Now, I'm not the most astute when it comes to reading body language, and even I saw it. It was actually the people I was with, which was my wife and a report from the BBC, that were much more aware of what was going on. We had a picture together which he disliked, and that obviously got posted. Of course it is. Of course I'm going to post a picture of me with Rich Piana. And yeah, there were a little bit on my part, there were a little bit of, yeah, let's see who's the biggest sort of thing. But there was no, from my part, it was very much just social media banterry. It was nothing more than that. But Rich seemed to be quite, other people made more of it, particularly those that didn't like Rich or didn't like what he was doing. And so it was blown up as a bit of a rivalry. I've seen memes about the day I dwarf Rich and stuff like that. But it's bollocks. I mean, he had a lot better quality physique than I did. He was in a lot better condition than I was. But he stopped talking to me after that.
Really?
Yeah, he just, boom, silence. Because he had originally spoke to me about potential sponsorship. Or at least working the stand. And then when he met me, that all disappeared. And what Rich was I think genuinely a nice guy. I don't think he was a particularly vindictive guy. And I know there's been issues with him and that moron that ordered the whatever it was order on him where he got loads of phone abuse.
Oh yeah, Jason Genova.
Yeah, but to be fair in all that, you know what? Jason's mother and his so-called worker should have been far more policing on Jason's behaviour, but they allowed him to do it because it made him fucking money. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Jason's got mental health issues and everything else, but at what point do you excuse someone making someone's family life hell?
Right.
And how many people could say in the same situation they wouldn't have gone round and had words?
Yeah.
Because his wife was getting death threats and all sorts.
Wow, was it to that extent?
Yeah, it was ridiculous the level it got to.
Wow.
You know, I always found Rich a very nice person, but a very insecure person. And then this is probably a bad habit of mine, I don't know, but I'm a big people watcher.
Okay.
And I will post stuff online or I will post comments in conversations because I like to poke and just see how people react.
Sure.
And it became very apparent with Rich that he was very insecure. And then it became very apparent. And I know he'd been open a couple of times about having issues with other drugs. And then he let out that he ran an insulin growth hormone protocol before he went to an expo. So basically, he was turning up at expos 20, 30 pounds bigger than he naturally was through supercompensation of glycogen and water within the muscle using GH and insulin. And it was stuff like this that Rich was getting into. And he turned out, you know, he was probably actually inside quite lonely.
Yeah.
He never seemed to be one with himself. He never seemed to quite be able to accept who he was or where he was. And though he was very successful financially, and to a lot of people, he was, you know, a very influencing factor in their lives. Deep down in himself, he actually seemed quite unhappy. And hence the recreational use and obviously everything that led to his demise. Rich, whether you hated him or liked him, I don't think it really matters. But the fitness world was a bit of a less colourful place once he'd gone.
Yeah, and you know, I appreciate you talking about it because I mean, it's a little bit of a somber note, but it's true. I mean, you just consistently hear about people who are just in these kind of darker places, and I think, unfortunately, you know, kind of like you said before, when you were natural, like you didn't really care if people used, it was just something you didn't know, and likewise, I mean, I think there's sports and maybe situations where people are going to do what they're going to do. But I think a lot of the time people are turned towards the use of these drugs, not because they're thinking about it in a healthy way, but because they maybe have these demons and, they really want to impress other people. And I think it's important to kind of get that out there because, like you said, Instagram, they're all heroes, and you don't see the other side about how lonely a lot of these people are. And
do you know what I think the biggest driving factor behind steroid use is?
What's that?
People are fucking lazy. No, honestly.
Yeah.
This is going to sound elitist, and I don't mean it this way, and I don't mean it to come off like that. But 20 years ago, powerlifting and bodybuilding were very niche sports. And they were very niche sports because only a few people had the fucking balls to do what it took to do it. With the popularization of drugs, it's allowed people who don't have the balls to play at something they were never designed to play at. Mm. It's like auto-tune allowing me to release a single. Right. I can't sing for shit. I cannot hold a note. But computer software would allow me to release a single. That does not make me a singer. And drugs have very much enabled a generation of people that would have no interest in bodybuilding, who would have tried it and very quickly fallen to the wayside because they just could not adhere to the diet or the amount of training intensity that's required to build a physique the proper way.
Yeah.
Because they would not have gained success. So they would have got bored, they would have got frustrated, and they would have fallen away. Right. But then you add drugs, which allows them to achieve some success, and now they're presenting a physique that is beyond their ability, really, without drugs. And as a result, that furthers their drug use, and it creates a vicious cycle. But the vast majority, I think, drives people into drug use is the fact, and I'm talking about non-competitive drug use here, even to competitors to some degree, but it is the fact that they're fucking lazy. The biggest single thing I see in the sport today that hinders people's achievements is the simple fact that they cannot or do not train hard enough.
Yeah, and certainly, not that you can't generalize everybody for that, but you do see that, right? But you do see it. You see a lot of people who they think they're training really hard and they probably got 5 reps left in that set. It just depends on the camp, but in the culture that maybe their gym is. You were very fortunate, I think, in the gym that you were at. A lot of times, there's. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I said I had a baptism of fire, and I was brought up the hard way when it came to training. But I also had an enjoyment out of that as well.
Right.
So I never found that style of training a chore.
Yeah.
Diet's a chore. Never liked dieting, which is why you've never seen me really grace a stage, because I don't like dieting, but I've always enjoyed the training. I mean, I'm not saying that these people shouldn't do what they do. That's a personal choice at the end of the day, but the fact remains that bodybuilding wouldn't be as popular if it wasn't for drugs, because not as many people would be able to do it.
Right.
And a large number of people that are involved in this sport are involved in this sport because they gain a modicum of success and progress because they use.
Absolutely. Yeah. And unfortunately, I was kind of like you. When I was younger, I started lifting when I was around 12, but the gym I was at, it had like some pretty hardcore lifters. I mean, a few, like mainly the owner and his friends were really big, and he gave me some tips, but I also loved just like killing myself in there. And I remember like when I was on like the forums and people were saying, oh, well, like young guys don't know how to push themselves. And I always, even like to this day, I still very much argue against that like my teenage self definitely just like destroyed himself in the gym because I loved it, because I kind of had this ego and pride about it that I had to push myself. And certainly not everybody is like that. And that probably has led me to, getting hurt at times too, but I wouldn't change it.
Yeah, I think there's also a difference here as well, though. I'm not meaning you in particular, but there's training hard and there's training hard effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people will go in the gym and they'll move weight and they'll sweat and they'll grunt and they'll groan and they'll come out absolutely fucked. But they haven't been effective in the stimulus for growth they created. Where I was extremely fortunate was I got introduced to how impacting little twists and changes of form can be in stimulating muscle growth. I remember doing a set of leg extension at Ian Harrison's gym in Leeds. And Ian walked over and he just twiddled around my foot position and it was literally an inch. And the change, my quads just were on fire.
Yeah.
And it was little things like that over time that I kept getting introduced that made me realize you can train hard, but you can also train very effectively and hard. And that's a whole different level.
Right.
And I think that's where the other area where you see people go wrong is they burn and expend a lot of energy on ineffective training, which isn't creating a stimulus for growth.
Yeah, and then that would be a whole nother rabbit hole. But one thing I will say about that is I think that's one of the issues with early drug use is it kind of masks that, because you might have ineffective training, but if you're running like 2 grams of gear, then it kind of doesn't matter to a point. I mean, of course, it does matter to an extent, but you're still going to grow, and you might think your training is very effective.
One of the big problems is with the instigation of drug use is that, first of all, you'll get results that you haven't really earned.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem there is twofold. When you cease, because you've relied on drugs to create the growth, when you cease the drugs, the growth will regress because you haven't had that platform. So straight away, we have a driving factor to continue use because nobody likes to go backwards. Nobody. Right. The second issue there is mentally, you do a cycle. You grow, you come off, you lose some size, so you go back on a cycle, but you don't grow as much as you did last time. So you don't sit there and go, right, okay, well, maybe it's because my training is shit. Maybe it's because my diet is shit. Because that means you've got to look at yourself and take responsibility for the fact that you are not progressing. It's a lot easier to go, you know what, I need to up the dose. Mm-hmm. And social media will reinforce this decision if you look at it. There's plenty of people out there saying, yeah, if you want to get massive, you need big doses. You don't need big doses to get massive. You need big doses to get massive quick.
Right.
There is a difference.
Yeah.
If you've got time on your side, you can get massive with small doses.
Right. Yeah, that's I think I've heard you talk with Dave Palumbo, and I know you guys have somewhat similar views on that as well.
Yeah, we differ in a lot of things, but we have some similar views on other things.
So just to kind of wrap up here, we didn't specifically mention the charity. You had said the Edward Foundation is where you'd like my donation to go towards. Can you just briefly explain what that is and why you chose it?
Yeah, so the Edward Foundation is a Bulldog Rescue Foundation. For those that know me know that I've had Bulldogs for quite some time. I also work as a foster for the Edward Foundation. So basically, I take in neglected or abandoned or unwanted Bulldogs. Generally, they have behavioral or health issues, and we fix them up and get them ready to go out to a new home. And the Edward Foundation has grown huge. Bulldogs have become very, very popular in the UK. And as a result, their level of neglected and unwanted dogs has grown as well. They're not a cheap dog to own. They have some particular specific health issues. Their diets can be tricky. And generally, they can be very expensive to maintain health-wise. And as a result of that, people see this lovely, cute bulldog that they think is going to grow into this gorgeous, old English, typical bulldog. And then they suddenly discover that they have to clean their nose rope every day, their tail pocket every day. They need eye drops every day. They have to eat a very specific diet because they're allergy sensitive and all this sort of crap. And suddenly it's like, shit, this is a lot more than I bargained for. And as a result, they end up being either mistreated, not always deliberately, or unwanted. So the Edward Foundation spends a lot of time rehoming these dogs, but they are very specific in how they do it. So a new owner has to undergo an interview and a home check before they're considered for a dog, and then they are considered for a dog that will suit them rather than them getting to pick which one they want.
That's interesting. I did not know that about Bulldogs being a lot higher maintenance there. But that sounds like an awesome cause. So,
Well, I'm not a fan of people. I prefer animals.
I think I've had somebody else say that as well. So Dave, where can people find more about you if they want to hear more information from you?
Oh God. Okay. Obviously, I'm on Facebook under Dave Crosland. Crosland's with one S, by the way. I have a website which is www.crosslands.org.uk. It's just a general service site that I use to promote my services. I do a podcast with Scott McNally called Drugs and Stuff. And I have a YouTube channel which I think is You See the Freak still. I'm not sure if I changed the name. I can't remember. Which I don't put as there's a big back catalogue on the YouTube channel of drug information about different products and how they operate and this sort of thing. Generally now it's more just general bollocks from me rather than specifically drug focused. So I do have a new video coming up today about the impact of drugs in the brain.
Okay.
I think that's the main ones really.
Awesome, man. Well, I'll put links to all that in the description, and thanks for talking today.
My pleasure.